So we're going to continue to finish up with content today, and we're going to talk a little bit about translational research, which is now called um, application research, I believe. And we really use translational science and translational research to move studies from the bench to the bedside. And we're still taking way too much time to get that done, but we know the process is tedious and lengthy. We want to try to decrease the time to get from what's being researched to put that into practice. Your chapter outcomes, which are not in this PowerPoint, but we're going to talk about the use of translational research, improvement science, intervention research, and evaluation research principles within the process of systematic decision making. We really use translational research in evidence-based practice and quality improvement to look at clinical problems and how we can resolve those problems and move to a better practice model. Then we're also going to look at basic logic model for the identified project of the individual. So we're going to talk a little bit and look at how we would go about the process of doing some translational science and translational research. Review your terms here, and we'll look at the questions in the back of the textbook. I'll give you those answers so you can try to make understanding of all of this foreign language when it comes to a type of research. So your definition then of translational research, again, is moving from the basic research, the bench research, into practical application. This is really evidence-based practice driven and quality improvement. So how can we look at what's happening, and even though it's complicated and maybe obscure, how can we move those ideas and processes into practice? We want to implement stuff that's happening to the patient through quality improvement and evidence-based practice and see how that can improve the lives of our patients. We'll look at it as patient-oriented at the bedside and then population-oriented. Y'all are doing the community health course, which talks about populations, how we can move the research in regards to population into practice. So more different types of translational research then are patient-oriented, population-based, intervention research, basic research, and applied research. So we're going to look at those just a little bit just now. So as we talked about in the beginning of the course, we have basic research, which is preclinical and human trials. So let's take the example of creating this vaccine for coronavirus. So we are in the process, scientists are in the process of trying to figure out how to best approach a vaccine so that humans can get the vaccine, and then we get the vaccine, then we develop antibodies against the virus, and then when we were exposed to the virus, we can combat the virus by having our antibodies attack the virus, and then we are not sick, right? So they've how can we do this? They're pretty soon going to start some clinical trials. We know that from everything that I've read that the research shows that the coronavirus COVID-19 is not mutating, and that there is a point on the virus that we can use and manipulate to create an effective vaccine. And if you all were around when H1N1 came online and was infecting us in like 2009, they developed the vaccine with less than 2 years, and Seth, my child, got the vaccine. Even though we never got sick or exposed, he received the vaccine, so if he's exposed again, he will not get sick. That's kind of how all vaccines have come online, that we do preclinical trials, human trials, then the FDA approves, and then we move it into use every day. So that takes time, like we've talked about. And then we can do that with other things too, to move that concept of doing these things to the bedside. And what is our best practices? What is our quality improvement problems that we can do? And we need both, right? We need to figure it out in the lab, but we also need to bring it to the bedside. And there's phases in the translational research and action research. We have patient-oriented research, assimilation of identified results to practical management, and then integrating those best practices, quality improvement problems into patient care. And we include the patients in this process. What do they see as the best way to do this? So we look at all that. Our translational research model here that your book talks about is going from basic research to patient-oriented research and population-based research. We want to get to the people and how can we make that process better. In our improvement science, we have beginnings. Berwick talked about moving to improvement science at the bedside. Plan, do, study, act, PDSA, that's the process for evidence-based practice. They talk about that a lot in our evidence-based practice textbooks and in the course that we're developing. And there are 7 propositions to address the principles of PDSA. Let's see if the next slide talks about the 7 principles. Not really. So let's go back and talk about the 7 principles of propositions for improvement science. That the science of improvement is grounded in testing and learning cycles that philosophically founded on conceptualistic pragmatism, adopt an amalgamation of psychology and logic, respect the perspectives of justification and discovery, stipulate the inclusion of operational definitions, utilizes Schwarhart's theory of cause systems, which is a process of control charts used to present statistical processes, control and link with system thinking, and enlightened by systems theory. That's on page 351 in your textbook, and it talks about propositions to address operating principles in improvement science and implementation science. So with our logic modeling then, that's we use translational research and translational science, and it's an innovative application of planning, implementation, and evaluation that's been advocated and sponsored. And the CDC talks about variations of the term logic model like roadmap, theory of change, program action, model of change, concept map, and outcome map. And the concept incorporated within the movement towards best practices, evidence-based practice, have been that the logic modeling process. So your book talks about definitions of logic modeling on page 352, and then 353 has a figure of a logic model template with inputs, outputs, and outcomes and the impacts of those. Take a look at that one. Those questions come up in the end of the chapter, and you might see those again on the exam. Different types of logic modeling can be used depending on where your practice setting is. Here's that picture I was telling you about that's on page 353. So we have the input, our resources, what can we invest, what activities are we going to do, who's going to participate, what is our short-term outcome, long-term outcome, what is the impact of that. So that's your template there. There's different categories for logic modeling. Theory approach, so our change theories, how do we get people to change? Outcomes approach, what is the best outcomes that we can have for the situation and the problem? And an activities approach, which looks at the implementation strategies, and we use that mostly in administration. And to the steps of the logic model, we look at a problem, we formulate the goal and the problem statement. We use if-then a lot. What sources do we have? What is our to-do list? what will our outputs be? We need measurable and they reflect a change. And what are the impacts of that model? We can use the SMART acronym, specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and timed for our long-term, short-term, and impact statements. And then we have assumptions and external factors. We look at grants for evidence-based practice projects. What are the advantages? We incorporate planning, implementation, and evaluation. It's an interdisciplinary approach. We look at discrepancies. How will that affect our partners? What are our stakeholders? It helps with accountability. This is the best way to do this, and everybody is on board with the process. So our action plan, we have our list, we have our objectives, we have measurable indicators, what's our target, what time frame are we going to use here, what's the step-by-step process for going about the research in our action plan. Here is a worksheet that we can use to map out what we're going to do. And we have that working document that can be changed and shared. And then we have a summary at the end to provide to our stakeholders. And here's some summary points that I'm going to click through. And you can look at those and look at your chapter. And I'm going to show you a logic model video. If I can get it to start.
Data is everywhere. No, really, you use it in your everyday life. You collect, analyze, and act upon data when you do anything. From handling your household budget, counting calories in your diet, or figuring out the ideal time to leave for work. So, if data is everywhere, and you interact with it daily, why is this culture a recurrent theme in healthcare settings? And how can we turn that culture into this one? The simple fact is, you can't ignore data when trying to improve the quality of healthcare. Data is an essential part of our work. It shows us what needs to improve and whether or not specific actions are helping make these improvements. Don't know where to start? Why not start with the logic model? The logic model helps you determine what data you need, how you're going to collect it, and what the data is going to tell you. It's like a roadmap, an overview snapshot of what you're doing, and a great first step toward creating a new positive relationship with data. Let's work through an example. First, ask yourself, what are your short and long-term goals? Then, fill in the rest of the diagram with the information you already know. Inputs, outputs, assumptions, and external factors. Inputs are what you invest, like staffing, funding, equipment, and technology. Outputs are the activities you're doing, and whom you're doing them for. Assumptions are what you already know. And external factors are things that are out of your control, like organizational changes and environmental factors. Don't feel like you have enough information to start? The logic model helps you identify the data you need and tells you what's missing so you can figure out how to fill in the gaps. Feel like you have too much data and don't know what to do with it all? The logic model helps you organize and prioritize the data to avoid overcollection. Feel like you can't do it alone? No problem. To make the greatest impact, an organization should collaboratively develop and use logic models at all levels and staff positions for a shared sense of ownership and accountability. And the best part about logic models, they're flexible and evolving. You can create your logic model based on your current understanding and then revise it as you go along. Say your organization wants to improve staff retention. This is what your logic model might look like. Again, inputs are what we invest. Outputs are what we are doing. and outcomes are our goals. Assumptions are existing knowledge, and external factors are things that might matter but we can't control. In a struggling healthcare culture, data is everywhere, but nobody knows what to do with it. The team that takes the time to create a culture shift around embracing data, using the logic model as a guide, builds a stronger value proposition, which in the end is better for business and patients and residents. What kind of data culture do you want to create?
Oh, let me just hide that. Let me just hide this. So that's the end of translational science. I really like that video. So look at your questions at the back and let me know if you have any issues with any of those things.